Hello and welcome to the Living with Trauma series. I'm Dr. Frank Drummond, National Medical Director for Psychiatry for HCA Healthcare. Today we're going to be discussing trauma junkies, and I have the pleasure of being joined by Rhonda Kelly. Starting her career in emergency response as an expanded protocol EMT working on Antarctic icebreakers, Rhonda Kelly spent the next 21 years working in career and volunteer roles in EMS, the fire service, and nursing. During her fire career, she also served as the health and safety officer, developing physical fitness, nutrition, wellness, injury prevention, crisis response, and mental wellness programs. In 2016, she founded Responder Strong, a collaborative initiative to build better mental health supports for responders and their families. In January of 2020, Responder Strong transitioned to its new home within the All Clear Foundation, as Rhonda became the Director of Health and Wellness for Global Medical Response. In November 2020, she became the Executive Director of the All Clear Foundation, continuing her work to improve the overall wellness of responders and frontline healthcare workers. Welcome, Rhonda.
Thank you very much. It's a pleasure to be here.
I was curious, at the All Clear Foundation, you talk about serving the responder community. Who does this term encompass in your, what defines a responder, and what do responders have in common?
Fantastic. We define emergency responders as those who have a similar set of experiences and cultural exposure, specifically those who work on the front lines, providing care in emergent situations, where arguably their single greatest exposure is to the intense trauma and suffering of others, in the complete absence of any preparation or awareness of the context of a stress injury formation, and the ways that empathy and compassion, two of their greatest skill sets, can become pathways for injury if they're not aware of it in this field. The other thing that we find is in common in the emergency responder world is that we all tend to work in cultures that have traditionally been ones that eat our own, cultures that have quite clearly told us that any emotional or mental impact from the job is clearly a sign of weakness and unfitness for duty, which is of course a significant barrier prohibiting reaching out for help in mental or emotional challenges.
That's interesting. So you mentioned two of the predominant traits are empathy and compassion. That's a driver for doing this kind of work from what you've seen?
Absolutely. And to be more specific about who falls under the emergency response umbrella for us, it's the traditional quote unquote first responders, law enforcement, fire, EMS, dispatch, and all of their subsidiaries, to include corrections officers, search and rescue, ski patrol, wildland firefighters. The list goes on. But we also include our counterparts on the other side of the ER door, the frontline medical workers. Having had the experience of working on both sides of that door in the past personally, I recognize that a lot of our cultural issues, challenges, and a lot of our occupational exposure issues are very, very similar. In addition, to your point, our personalities are very similar. If you ask any responder why they get into the work that they do, invariably the answer is some version of to help other people. And this, I believe, speaks to the fact that we all set very high personal expectations for ourselves. We are all very outcome driven, and oftentimes we struggle when we're unable to change that outcome or to shift it into the direction that we prefer to see it.
Interesting. I'll go back to your other point from the first question of sort of a careers where you each your own. This empathy and compassion for others and a desire to help others doesn't always reflect on helping yourself, right?
Exactly. And I believe that speaks to some of the cultural influences that we have absorbed in the past, that empathy and compassion is designed for others, but when shown to ourselves or even to some of our comrades in arms, so to speak, that it is unwarranted. I've heard so many responders from various branches state in the past that I don't understand why I'm reacting to this, that this isn't my trauma, this isn't my emergency, really discounting not only to others around them, but to themselves the value of that empathy and compassion, and not understanding that they're having a very human response to a very abnormal occupational situation.
So by definition, empathy is sensitivity, right? Understanding what other people are feeling and dealing with. That means you're experiencing it and feeling and dealing with it yourself. And sometimes there's a disconnect there. As you said earlier, I don't understand why this is affecting me when it's someone else's trauma. Well, it is because you're empathic, and your way of interpreting and experiencing that event has been that you do internalize it. That's how you're good at what you do. Kind of a trap though, right? Or I would say You fill up on that. Sometimes too much of that can really lead to a sense of distance or burnout.
Exactly. And I think that is something else that's really enforced by all of the various responder cultures is this whole martyr complex that you're here to serve other people and you should come last if you're even addressed at all. And this really contributes to that sense of shame, I believe, that many responders feel when they recognize that they are being impacted mentally or emotionally by the job. The culture has told us that we should just be superhuman. And in the absence of any preparation to deal with this sort of stress injury, this compassion fatigue, or the many other manifestations, that we should just be able to manage this. And if we can't, we're weak and we're shameful and we're not as strong as the other members of the tribe. And this, I think, really contributes to a lot of the devastating statistics we see around suicide, but also the other forms of suffering, depression, anxiety, substance misuse, etc.
Definitely. I think you and I share this in common. We're interested in this community because we relate to this community. We like people that take jobs to help people, not to work for someone, right? They're working for people, not for their boss or for someone else. A particularly vulnerable community, but also a particularly strong community and kind of fun to work with. Do you enjoy this level of engagement that you've chosen?
I absolutely do. So early or about mid in my career as a firefighter paramedic, I began working as an ER nurse and a psych ER nurse on the side. And the motivation for doing so was that I had started to notice some changes, which were actually indicative of burnout myself. I saw them in a lot of my coworkers. I felt frustrated with the frequent flyers in our community, the people who continued to call 911. It's the easy button. They didn't know who else to call. But our only options were to offer them a ride in a patrol car to jail or a ride in the ambulance to the ER, which was already overflowing and didn't have the capacity to deal with many of the issues that we're called to, whether it's child welfare, chronic substance abuse, chronic mental illness. So I found in myself, I was really being worn down, recognizing I came here to make a difference. And I don't feel like I am. I feel like it's Groundhog Day. I'm running the same call over and over again and doing so while poorly equipped to address the needs for which we're being called. So I thought I'm going to work on the other side of the ER door. I'm going to find ways to improve my care. And of course, what I experienced there was exactly what I had been experiencing in the field. It's where we take our patients, and those people, the nurses, the doctors, the frontline medical workers, are very similar to us. They got into their jobs to help others. They put themselves last. They hold themselves to a very high personal standard and feel shame when they feel like they haven't met it or that they're experiencing mental and emotional reactions to which they don't feel entitled in the course of their job. And that's where my passion, my interest in really supporting the responders, supporting those who are serving the community was born. And that's where Responder Strong and now All Clear Foundation are drawing their impetus from.
It's interesting when you do deal with these teams. What I find when I look for physicians, for example, that are a good fit for work in the ERs or similar levels of care, there's pretty specifically a group of people that either like it or they don't like it very much. And it's not only the trauma and the empathic need, but also the ambivalence or lack of 100% solution. You have to be able to tolerate that and feel effective and enjoy your role. Sometimes that requires some coaching for people in this field to realize, no, you're not going to fix every single situation and you're going to solve this problem, but you're going to be part of the solution and you're going to do what you can to help put together the correct resources to get through this. I think that applies broadly. Sometimes people need some support on that level to realize they didn't fail, they did their part, and the situation is separate from them in some ways.
Absolutely. And to that point, I think one of the most valuable things we can coach or can teach members of all of these occupations is you don't have control over the outcome. You do have control over your internal measures for success. So many people didn't realize part of the reason they're feeling burned out isn't only because they're being asked to do more, but because they're being asked to do it without the ability to go to the gym, to go to church, to go on vacations, to celebrate family milestones, to have social gatherings with friends, to have these times that are decompression, that are recharging. And so this really compounds the impacts of the added workload, pushing more and more people towards burnout in a way that they didn't understand.
Right. I would add to that another factor. A lot of our people with all the protective gear and the lack of family contact, or at least direct family contact, because they couldn't be part of the process because of precautions, really did decrease their job satisfaction also, like more than they predicted. They thought, well, I'm still doing my job. I'm actually busier than ever. But without that kind of feedback loop of gratitude from families, interaction with families, the literally ability to communicate with your face, those kind of things, that was a big shift that I think had a bigger effect on some people and their job satisfaction than they thought it would or had imagined, in addition to what you're speaking of. So it was a real confluence of factors that came together in 2020, right?
Absolutely. And I find it interesting. I used to live in Seattle, and I always noticed how after a string of cloudy gray days, one afternoon of sun, you'd notice this inflation in everybody's mood. Everyone was smiling, everyone was happier. They didn't really understand why. But I'm starting to notice that as we're emerging from a lot of the COVID related precautions, particularly the relaxation of the mask orders, that I'm seeing that same sense of elation in the general population. Oh, we can see each other's face. And I think that was really lost on a lot of us over the past year, that not having access to that full range of facial expressions really impacted our neurological satisfaction for human connection. And that so much of what we are experiencing with the increases in loneliness and senses of uncertainty and loss are really tied into that loss of human connection. And that's not a weakness. It's a basic human need that makes us stronger when we recognize it and feel it.
Hmm. Related but important, what I've noticed just personally was when my kids returned to in-person school, which was just this spring. It was a little bit delayed. Um, there was a huge increase in gratitude towards school, towards teachers. You could feel it from the teachers. I could see it from my kids. It was that explosion, like you said, of a sunny day after a long period of rain. I didn't know that was missing, but when you could feel it, you're like, oh wow, that really feels not just better, but also more grateful, like that sort of peace that's really important to being a human being, in my opinion, and to having your own sort of connectedness and prevention, burnout prevention as well.
Absolutely.
So I'm interested in the All Clear Foundation, very active, and it seems like a foundation that tries to evolve to meet the needs of its participants and members. How is All Clear sort of pivoted in the last, say, 6 months to try to meet sort of changing needs of the community?
Great question. So the timeliness of Responder Strong folding in All Clear Foundation, we weren't aware of in advance, but with the ever increased importance of mental and emotional wellness last year during this time of burnout and this challenge that we've spoken about, it was wonderful to bring Responder Strong and its networks throughout the community into the All Clear Foundation circle. All Clear Foundation definitely supported the continuation of our efforts, our mental health and emotional health efforts, but on the same time, we recognized that there are other needs that play into our overall well-being, including medical and physical health needs, financial needs, social and relational health needs, which obviously, to your point just now, really reached an apex last year. So All Clear Foundation's really been taking a more comprehensive ecosystem approach, recognizing that to support the wellness and longevity of responders, we need to take a broader lens. Mental and emotional health is incredibly important, but it is also inextricably linked with these other domains. We are very oriented towards creating solutions. We know that there are a lot of good groups out there doing awareness. We are also participating in awareness, but we want to create easily accessible and navigable systems through strategic partnerships, knowing that this is a bigger task than any one organization can take on their own, to satisfy the needs of responders and to help them live full lives. We know in the past so many responders have paid for their service with their lives, either in quality or in longevity. I don't think that's right. So we are really working to put the tools out there to empower responders. I can't count how many times as a peer supporter in the fire service, I heard other firefighters say, stop counseling me and just give me the tools to fix this. So that is
Mhm.
a big portion of our strategy and our outreach, is to create tools for responders, for their families, and to help improve the quality of their lives through those paths.
In America, there's a stigma to seeking help, behavioral health help, psychiatric help in general. I find this to be elevated among first responders. Um, a bit because of what we spoke about earlier, that need to be tough and that need to be the strong one and be the healer, and be the helper. What can we do to decrease that? I was with a team in Florida just last week, and they were putting together a first responder sort of crisis team, with the hospital team to try to help those more extreme cases. But we're really bogged down with all this confidentiality and ways of accessing care and a secret way to go and get help and that kind of thing. I would like a world where it didn't feel so negative to seek help. What can we do to help people get the help they need, particularly this community?
I love that you really honed in on the root of the problem, and the root of the problem is stigma. To that end, I think that 2020 had a bit of a silver lining in that things finally got so crazy, especially in these occupations, that it eroded stigma much more rapidly than we ever could have through any of our external efforts. I think so many responders looked at it and said, things have finally gotten so crazy. If you're not reacting to this, you're not paying attention. So what we've been finding is that the demand, the open demand for services has now far exceeded what we have available. So it's a good problem to have. And it's not just the field responders that I see this reduction of stigma and this increased expression of need in. I think it is very key that we're also seeing it in leadership. We have had outreach from response leaders across the country saying, my people are suffering, our morale is down, we are losing members at a rapid rate, more rapid than we can replace them. We need help. We need help now. Can you provide solutions? And in juxtaposition to this, they're also reaching out and saying, we need help at the leadership level. We're seeing
Mhm.
fatigue, we are seeing exhaustion, we're seeing loss of passion, we are seeing toxic leadership traits developing, and we know it's because the stress levels are out of control. We need help for ourselves. And I think that's also one of the biggest pieces of normalization. It's not just individual responders reaching out, but it's the leaders of large organizations and small reaching out and saying, no, this is an imperative now. This is a budgetary priority. This is an operational priority for us.
Right. Agreed. And I will also say that their leadership includes modeling, seeking out behavior and normalizing that and recognizing it in their local team. So, um, you know, supportive self-care coming from a national level is fine, but it really sometimes doesn't cross that final mile. That final mile comes with the teams that you're working with, both to recognize personality changes or stress in your team members, and also saying, hey, I took Prozac for 6 months after blank happened, and it really helped me, or whatever. Just being more open to it and not and helping decrease that stigma to seeking care, I think, is really what needs to happen, sort of with the local teams level. And then it is up to leadership to prioritize this for their people as well.
Absolutely. And I really like your psychiatric perspective going after the meds. We know so many responders have this concept in their mind. And oftentimes I believe it's because the only training they received on mental illness were the extremes of psychiatric crisis. And their mental model for that is if I go on any of those medications, I'm going to need them forever. I'm broken. I am irreparable. And that has been increasing the stigma in the past. Now what I'm seeing is as more testimonials emerge from leaders or from peer supporters, whoever decides to speak openly, not only saying I was on that medication, but I was on it for 6 months and then I got off it, is really
Mhm.
helping to clarify some of those myths that have contributed to stigma in the past. We recently taught our Responder Strong mental health curriculum to a group of public safety in Wisconsin. We do a pre and post assessment, and these were fire and EMS professionals. I was shocked that prior to the class, 44% of the participants believed that depression and anxiety were incurable permanent conditions. And I was
Mhm.
completely floored by that in this group that we would have expected to have a deeper level of understanding. And thinking if that's the way they view it in the external community, how much shame that must trigger in themselves when they're starting to experience some of the symptomology.
Part of what I'm interested in also is normalizing trauma as a human experience, that it's something that almost 100% of people experience at some time in their life, and it has an impact on them. And to acknowledge it, and this is not a medication, this is just a sort of acknowledging how it does affect you and to work through it, um, is helpful for everyone, not just our trauma junkies. So let's talk about trauma junkies for a minute. We came up with that term, and how would you describe trauma junkies as a career choice? or as a personality, we'll say.
I think as a personality,
Yeah, that's more, yeah.
look at it. We know that studies on adverse childhood experiences show that the helping professions, whether it's military, medical professionals, emergency responders, and mental health care providers, on average tend to have higher than the community's average ACE scores. That a lot of this desire to help, this desire to be the rescuer, may have evolved as a childhood response reaction to an abnormal childhood situation, whether it's addiction, abuse, violence, whatever the cause was. So I see that this helps to create this personality, this responder orientation where I'm here to help others. I'm here to make the world a better place. I'm here to prevent others from suffering in the way that I may have suffered. We see an additional layer of that oftentimes in the peer support members across the response branches, that these are the providers who, very much like myself, recognized I care about the community, but I don't feel as impactful there. I really want to take care of my own. I want to support those who I see heading down the same path as I am. Some are ahead of me, some are behind me, but I want to support our personnel to avoid that needless suffering. So I see that personality being drawn into this type of work, being in meaningful lines of work, having something that really contributes to their sense of meaning and purpose as an individual in life. Ironically, oftentimes we find that what we experience in any of these occupations can challenge the very root of our belief in meaning and purpose in life. And we oftentimes reference in our teachings Viktor Frankl's work that life doesn't have an inherent meaning. It's up to you to create your own. And when your external experiences, whether that's something as extreme as a concentration camp or the extremes of emergency response work, challenge what you think is your role in life and what your purpose and meaning is, it's up to you to redefine it, not to just give up and lose hope. That's one of the things that we really see with this population is they're really driven to have that challenge, to have that sense of personal accomplishment, and to really pursue their purpose, their passion-driven purpose in life.
Mm-hmm.
But to your point about trauma, we're never taught that trauma is an inherent portion of life, but it's also particularly emphasized when you work in this line of work. And it doesn't matter if you are skilled for this work, going back to the empathy and compassion capacity. Nobody wants to call 911 and have a sociopath show up. Those are key traits, but those are pathways for injury. And a lot of our teachings we've borrowed from the military, talking about stress injury, that this isn't mental illness. You develop depression, you develop anxiety, you can develop substance misuse disorder when you're not dealing with the cumulative smaller T traumas over the course of your career. And I think that messaging has really been lost to a lot of responders. I've heard so many say that with a definite comparative suffering attitude that I haven't earned this illness when it's actually a wound, and pointing to a military member of the group saying, you know, he or she saw combat, they're doing just fine. I shouldn't be having this reaction. So I really feel like a lot of what we are doing now is targeting that stress injury model and targeting the personal motivations of responders getting into this work and normalizing, to your point, trauma is part and parcel of this job. If you want to be good at this job, you have to get good at taking care of yourself. It's just like working out physically. And we do draw a lot of physical fitness analogies. And if you break your leg on the job, nobody's ever going to come up and say, we just don't think you have the femurs for this work. But we do it all the time to people who get DUIs, are diagnosed with depression, admit that they're experiencing panic attacks. Maybe you're just not fit enough for this job. And
all right, Rhonda, you just packed a lot into that answer. So I'm about to deconstruct it a little bit. You just put a 6-month seminar into a 20-minute interview. So I'm just kidding. No, that's great. That's all great information and a lot of take homes. I will say, just to your first point, that a lot of the drive for doing this kind of work is a history of trauma. And I think that's part of the healing process, right? Is to embrace your own history. And why does that make you want to do this? It's healing to prevent someone else from having maybe a similar experience to what you experienced, even if it was as a child or somewhat passive or even partially remembered. It doesn't matter. I think it's important for people to embrace that. I do this because it's what I want to do. It's because what I like to be an agent of change in the world, and to man search for meaning, like you said, from that book and that sort of philosophy, to internalize it and embrace it is part of the way to move forward and to enjoy this kind of work. I will say one quote that comes to mind was from an interview I did last week on pandemic parenting. And it's a mother who'd been, working from home and experiencing things, but also a lot of work stress of trying to manage her job, et cetera. She woke up one day and said, I realize in 2 years, my employer is not going to care or remember how I handled the pandemic, but my family and my kids definitely will. And that is what her driver was for self-care. And I think that was great. I actually got the chills, and I've been trying to spread that word, because I think that is one way to frame it for people, that they have to take care of themselves and their families first.
Absolutely. That is a fantastic statement.
Mhm. Well, we're at time now, so I really appreciate it. I would really encourage people to look more into the All Clear Foundation, and the work that you're doing. It's making an incredible impact. There's a lot of work around trauma and a lot of work that you're doing to understand it, and the people that work in these fields and its impact on them, both short term and long term. And I think it's amazing. I really appreciate all the work that you're doing, that you're promoting. It's what's going to move us forward past 2020, in my opinion.
Absolutely. And very much in the vein of post-traumatic growth, I think we're going to emerge from this experience of the pandemic and all the associated social challenges stronger as organizations and as responders than we were going in. And in a way, to your point about gratitude, if this hadn't happened, if we haven't been challenged to this degree, we wouldn't have the capacity for the type of growth that we do now. And I think it's a very exciting time to be involved in this work.
Agreed. Thanks again. Really enjoyed talking to you today. Thank you for your time.
Thank you very much. I've enjoyed it.